The chamber was built to make species feel small. That was the point of it. The ceiling went so high that the upper third disappeared into design shadow. The walls were pale stone, something quarried from a moon that nobody lived on anymore. And they curved inward at the top like two hands about to press together. 47 species could sit in this room at once. Every seat had a clear line to the speaking podium. The speaking podium had a clear line to every seat. It was meant to feel like the center of everything. Ambassador Lena Croft stood at the podium and felt nothing about the room. She was 51 years old. She had short gray hair that she cut herself. Her face had stopped being young so long ago that she didn't remember the change happening. She wore standard diplomatic gray. No medals, no pins, nothing decorative. Just the small Earth seal on her collar. The seal was no bigger than a thumbnail. She set her papers on the podium. They were actual papers, printed, physical. Some of the delegates found this old-fashioned. A few smiled at it. Croft did not care what they found it. She began to read. Her voice was flat, not cold. Flat. The voice of someone reading numbers aloud. Distances, quantities. The kind of voice that belongs to people who have spent a very long time learning not to let it shake. Earth's Unified Council submits the following to the Directorate Record, she said. In the 9-month period beginning the 4th of March, the Earth Frontier Authority has cataloged 11 separate incursions into the Meridian Buffer Zone. The Meridian Buffer Zone was established under Compact Article 7, Section 3, and as a demilitarized corridor of 30 light-years depth between Velhari Hegemony Territory and Earth's outer colony ring. She turned a page. Of these 11 incursions, 3 resulted in the disruption of Earth colony supply lines. 2 of those disruptions lasted longer than 30 days. The human settlements dependent on those supply lines number approximately 400,000 people. Another page. On the 17th of October, Earth Station Heliodor 7 ceased all communication. Heliodor 7 was a manned refueling and emergency shelter station located at coordinates 7.4 by 112 in the outer buffer zone. At the time of communication loss, the station had 147 personnel aboard. Earth Frontier Authority search vessels reached the station's last known coordinates on the 22nd of October. No station was present, no distress signals were found. 147 personnel remain unaccounted for. She turned another page. She did not look up at the chamber. She did not look at the 47 delegations arranged in their tiered seating. She read, Earth has submitted 11 formal protests to the Directorate in the 9-month period under review. Earth has received 11 acknowledgments of receipt and 3 preliminary review notices. No formal findings have been issued. No corrective action has been taken. No explanation for the disappearance of Heliodor 7 has been provided. Another page. Earth has reached the threshold of formal response. She paused there, not for effect. She was turning a page. If any vessel, fleet, installation, or proxy force acting in the interest of or under the authority of the Velhari Hegemony crosses the meridian line again, Earth will act. Earth will not issue further warnings, file further protests, or seek further review. She turned the last page. Earth will act without additional communication. She set the papers down. That concludes Earth's formal statement. The complete documentation, 11 pages, including appendices, has been submitted to the Directorate Record. She picked up her papers. She stepped back. The chamber was quiet for exactly as long as it took Councillor Thresh Aniv to unfold himself from his seat. He was a Velhari senior delegate, which meant he was very old by most species standard and very tall by all of them. And wrapped in something between a robe and a second skin that caught light and scattered it in ways that made looking at him feel like looking at a window made of colored glass. He moved with the ease of someone who had been the most important being in every room he'd entered for several decades and had stopped thinking about it. He stepped to the response podium. He smiled, or did the thing his face did that the translation system rendered as a smile, and he spoke for 22 minutes. He spoke about the long and complex history of Velhari-Earth relations, which he called a developing dialogue. He spoke about the importance of careful language in formal proceedings and how certain phrases in Earth's statement could be read as aggressive if taken without context. He spoke about the Directorate's established review process and the critical role it played in stopping misunderstandings from becoming incidents. He used the word charming to describe Earth's commitment to the formal record. He used the word understandable to describe Earth's concerns about Heliodor 7, which he called a regrettable and still being investigated navigational irregularity. He used the word proportional 11 times. He did not use the number 147. When he finished, several other delegations made small statements. A few expressed general sympathy for Earth's situation. Most expressed confidence in the Directorate's review process. The Preth delegate, a small, quiet creature named Coordinator Shesiv, who sat in the far left of the third tier, made a note on his data pad and said nothing aloud. He was counting pages. Croft stood at the side of the chamber and watched Thresh Aniv return to his seat. She straightened the small earth seal on her collar. It had not moved. She straightened it anyway. Her fingers needed somewhere to go. Her aide, a young man named Soto, who had been with her for 2 years, appeared at her shoulder. "They'll put it to a committee vote," he said quietly. 90 days, probably. Do you want to stay for the procedural vote?" "No." She walked toward the side exit. Her steps were even, not hurried, not slow. The walk of someone who has finished a task and is moving to the next one. Soto followed. Out in the corridor, pale stone, the same quarried from nowhere stone, lit with soft light designed to be comfortable for 47 different kinds of eyes. Croft stopped. She pulled out a small comm device and typed 11 characters, sent it. Soto waited. "What did you send?" he asked. He was young enough to still ask. "A note. To Commander Voss?" Croft put the comm away and started walking again. "Ambassador." Soto caught up. "Do you think they'll listen? After the statement?" She didn't answer right away. They walked. Their steps echoed past closed doors, past the quiet sound of other proceedings, other species managing other problems in other rooms. "The statement isn't for them," she said. "Then who is it for?" "The record." They walked out of the Directorate building into the transit plaza, where the light was real, from an actual star, filtered through the station's atmosphere. And Croft looked up at it for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at her schedule. "I have a debrief call at 1400, she said. "Oh, then I want to review the documentation before we transmit the full package." "All 11 pages?" "Yes." "Do you need me to flag anything specific?" "No," she said. "I know what's in it." She did. She had written most of it herself over 4 years, in pieces in the spare hours between other things. The first 10 pages were documentation, dates, coordinates, names, the kind of careful, steady record-keeping that looks like patience and is actually something else. Page 11 was different. She had written page 11 slowly. She had thought about it a long time. She had thought about the 147 people on Heliodor 7 whom she had never met. She had thought about the 400,000 people in colonies that had gone 30-plus days without supply runs. She had thought about 11 protests and 11 acknowledgments in a process that had processed nothing. Then she had written page 11 the way you write something when you are completely, finally done waiting. Back in the chamber, the procedural vote was being prepared. Coordinator Shesiv in the third tier had opened Earth's full submission on his datapad and was reading through it. Page 1. Page 2. The documentation, dates, coordinates, station IDs, supply route disruptions. He read carefully, the way he read everything, because he had learned early that the things people slip past careful readers were usually the things that mattered. He reached page 10. He turned to page 11. He read it. He read it again. The page was not a protest. It was not angry language or political positioning. It was a list. On every Velhari asset within 30 light years of the Meridian Line, stations, shipyards, fuel depots, communication relays, transit hubs, supply routes, each one cataloged, each one given coordinates to 3 decimal points of precision, each one marked with a small notation, a letter and a number. The letters were categories: S for station, Y for shipyard, R for relay, T for transit. The numbers were sequence numbers. They ran from 1 to 67. They were in order. Shesiv had spent 30 years in the Directorate. He had seen protests and statements and political gestures of every kind. He knew what posturing looked like. He knew what a bluff looked like. He knew what a targeting index looked like. He sat very still. Around him, the chamber continued its work. Maitreya Neve was conferring with his legal team about the phrasing of their formal response. The procedural staff was drafting the committee formation notice. The vote was being scheduled. The 90-day clock was being set. Shesiv looked at the sequence numbers, 1 to 67. In order, he looked at the bottom of page 11. There was a date there, small, almost like a footnote. He looked at that date for a long time. He ran the calculation. The directorate had logged the first Valhari incursion, the very first one, 9 months before this hearing, as a navigational irregularity, standard entry, filed and closed. The file had been closed within a week. The date on page 11 was 3 days after that first incursion, 3 days after the first one, before the second, before the third, before Heliodor 7, 4 years ago. And they started building this, Shesiv thought, when we filed the first one away. He sat with that. The chamber emptied around him. The lights shifted to their low setting. The pale stone walls went quiet. He opened a message on his data pad, addressed it to a contact outside the directorate, someone who might actually listen, who had the right kind of clearances and the right kind of judgment. He started typing. He stopped. He thought about what to say and how to say it and whether there was time. He didn't know how much time there was. He looked at the sequence numbers one more time, 1 to 67, in order. He started typing faster. Commander Ilara Voss was 3 days from Earth at standard cruise when the comm alert came through. She was in her office working through quarterly personnel assessments, 34 files, each one needing a read and a signature, the kind of work that had no drama in it and needed doing anyway. She had a method, read, sign, stack, next. She worked through the stack the same way she worked through everything, which was steadily, without rushing, without stopping. The alert chimed. She picked up the comm. 11 characters, that was all. Clock started. She set the comm down. She picked up her stylus and went back to the personnel assessment she'd been reading. She finished it. She signed it. She put it in the done stack. She picked up the next one. Outside her office viewport, stars moved past in the long, slow drift of cruise speed. The same stars as always. Nothing different about them. She worked through 4 more files, then she set the stylus down. As she opened her data pad and pulled up a file she had been building for 4 years. Not a protest file, not a diplomatic file, a logistics file, the kind that has no official name, the kind you build in your own hours, in your own storage, the kind that is either the most important document you've ever made or proof that you spent 4 years on something that never happened. She read through the first section the way you check a calculation you already know is right. Not because you doubt it, because the checking is part of the work. She closed the file. She opened a communication channel. "Get me the fleet coordinators," she said. "All 12. Her aide's voice came back. "All 12, Commander." "All 12. A pause. "That's all of them, Commander." "Yes." A shorter pause. "Yes. Vice Commander." She went back to her personnel assessments while she waited for the connections to open. She was near the end of the stack by the time all 12 channels confirmed. She did not preamble. "The clock started," she said. "Run your final readiness checks. Report deficiencies within 48 hours. After 48 hours, I don't want to hear about deficiencies. I want to hear about solutions." 12 voices confirmed. She closed the channel. She finished the last personnel assessment, filed it, set the stack aside. She looked out the viewport. Ordinary stars. She thought about 147 people. Not the long way. She'd learned years ago that the long way didn't have a useful end. She thought about them briefly and precisely. She thought about them long enough to confirm, one more time, that she was not doing what she was doing for the wrong reasons. She wasn't. She was doing it because the math was done. 4 years of work had arrived at a conclusion the way a survey arrives at a conclusion. Without heat, without anger, just with the weight of accumulated fact pressing down until there was only one answer left. The directorate would vote, the committee would review, the process would process. Earth would be done waiting for the process. She looked at the comm device on her desk. 11 characters. She had sent nothing back to Croft. There was nothing that needed saying. The message was not a question, it was a notification. The answer to a notification is action, not words. She pulled the personnel file stack back toward her and checked the signatures. All done. All filed. Good people. All of them. Fleet coordinators, ship commanders, the 22,000 below them. She had read every personnel file herself, twice. She knew what she was asking them to do. She signed the cover sheet, filed it, picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. The directorate's vote passed 43-2 at the end of the session. Earth's complaint would go to the Interspecies Relations Subcommittee for a standard 90-day review. A notice of acknowledgement would be transmitted to Earth's diplomatic office within 10 business days. Threshayanov thanked the chamber for its efficient and measured handling of a sensitive matter. 2 delegates voted no. Nobody asked them why. Coordinator Sheshev cast his no vote and then sat alone in the thinning chamber for a while after. His data pad open on his knee. Page 11. He kept coming back to it. 67 targets. Sequence numbers, a date. He had sent his message. He didn't know if it would reach the right people. He didn't know if the right people would understand what they were looking at. He didn't know if there was time for understanding to become action, even if everyone understood. He looked at the sequence numbers one final time. 1 to 67, neat, patient, built over 4 years, 1 entry at a time. Every time the directorate filed something away and called it resolved. The warning in the statement, the last paragraph, the one that would go into the official record and be discussed in directorate legal reviews for years, said cross the line and Earth will act. But page 11 didn't say anything. Page 11 just showed that Earth already knew, in precise and ordered detail, everything it would need to know. The warning was the statement. Page 11 was something else. Page 11 was the proof that the warning was never really necessary. Sheshev closed his data pad. He walked out of the empty chamber, into the corridor and moved fast, faster than was usual for him, thinking about who would listen and how much time he had, and whether those two things could possibly overlap. The corridor was long. He walked it quickly. It did not feel long enough. The second station went dark on a Tuesday. Not that Tuesday meant anything out past the meridian line. Days of the week were a human habit, a way of putting a frame around time so it didn't feel so large. Sergeant Dio Okafor knew it was a Tuesday because he kept a calendar on his bunk wall. A real paper calendar, the kind you tear sheets off with pictures of Earth cities on each month. This month was Lagos at dawn. He'd torn off enough sheets that he knew exactly which day it was, always, no matter how far from Earth he got. It was a Tuesday when Heliodor 9 stopped answering. Dio was 3 days out on a resupply run, crammed into the cargo section of a frontier hauler with 6 other soldiers and enough equipment to make the air smell like metal and old boots. They were not supposed to be combat soldiers on a resupply run. They were supposed to be cargo security, a standard precaution, 2 weeks out, 2 weeks back, straightforward work that didn't ask much of anyone. The comms alert came through the ship's speaker system. Not an alarm, just a change in status. One light on the communication board switching from green to a flat, unblinking gray. Gray meant no signal. Gray meant the station wasn't transmitting. Or the comms officer ran the check twice, then a third time. The way you do when the board is telling you something you don't want to believe. She ran it a 4th time. The result was the same every time. Heliodor 9, coordinates confirmed, no transmission detected, no emergency beacon, no automated backup signal, nothing, not static, nothing. Dio was looking at his resupply manifest when the captain's voice came over the internal channel. Calm, deliberate. The voice of someone deciding how to say a thing while saying it. Heliodor 9 is dark, the captain said. We are rerouting to the secondary depot at Callum Station. All personnel stand by. Dio set his manifest down. He picked it up again. He set it down. He looked at it. He had been reviewing the same page for 20 minutes without reading it. And now he kept his eyes on it because his eyes needed somewhere to go that wasn't the gray light on the comms board. Heliodor 9 had 214 people on it. He knew because he had been to Heliodor 9 twice before. He knew the layout of the main deck. He knew the commissary served a potato stew on Fridays that was genuinely good, better than it had any right to be this far from anywhere. He had played cards in the common room with a technician named Bautista, who cheated badly and badly pretended he wasn't cheating, and the whole table let him do it because it was funnier than winning. 214 people. He picked the manifest up again. Page 1. Item 1. He read the item number. He moved to item 2. 12 minutes later, a second transmission came through. Not from Heliodor 9. But from a Velhari automated navigation beacon that had appeared at Heliodor 9's last known coordinates. The beacon broadcast cheerfully in the standard directorate format, repeating its message on a loop. Transit lane realignment in progress. Civilian and commercial vessels, please divert to alternate corridor. Thank you for your cooperation. Dio read the beacon readout over the comms officer's shoulder. He looked at it for a long time. God punish this, he said, very quietly. Not to anyone in particular. Just something that needed to be said out loud so the inside of his head didn't hold it alone. He went back to his bunk. He sat down. He looked at the calendar on his wall. Lagos at dawn, orange light over the water. He'd never been to Lagos at dawn. He was born there, but he left young. And the dawn he remembered was gray and fast. Not like the picture. He thought about Bautista in the card game. He thought about 214. He picked up his manifest. He reviewed it from the beginning. In the directorate chamber, the condolences were formally expressed within 3 days. Councillor Thresh Aniv delivered them personally, which was considered a significant gesture. He expressed deep regret for the incident involving Heliodor 9. He used the word incident. He described the situation as deeply unfortunate and assured the chamber that the Velhari hegemony was committed to a full and transparent investigation into how such a navigational confusion could have occurred so close to an established human installation. Navigational confusion, that was the phrase. The Heliodor 9 beacon, the one broadcasting its cheerful loop at the station's former coordinates, was not mentioned. A committee was formed to review the incident. It was added to the existing committee reviewing the 11 prior incursions. The combined committee would report findings within 90 days. Given the added complexity of the new incident, an extension to 120 days was considered and approved. Earth's seat in the chamber was empty. It had been empty since Croft's aide sent the rescheduling notice, a brief professional message that Earth's diplomatic representation would be temporarily suspended pending internal review. No timeline given. No explanation beyond the word internal. The empty seat was in the third row, second from the left. There was a standard diplomatic chair with the Earth seal embossed on its back. Some of the delegates glanced at it during the session. Most did not. Thresh Aniv did not glance at it. Coordinator Shesev looked at it for a long time. He had sent 2 messages in the 2 weeks since the first hearing, 2 follow-ups. He had received 1 acknowledgement and 1 automated processing notice. His concern had been noted. It had been filed alongside a number of concerns raised during the review period. He looked at the empty seat. He thought about page 11. He thought about the date at the bottom of page 11 and what that date meant, and whether the people in this chamber understood that the date was not a coincidence. The committee chair was speaking about timelines. Shesev opened his datapad. He read page 11 again. He had read it many times by now. He knew it by memory. He read it anyway because reading it felt like the only useful thing he could do in a chamber full of people who hadn't read it. 67 targets, in order. A date 3 days after the first incursion, and now Heliodor 9 was gone, and Heliodor 7 before it, and the Velhari beacon was singing its loop at the empty coordinates, and Earth's chair was empty, and the committee was talking about 120 days. Shesev closed his datapad. He said nothing. What was there to say, and to whom, and would it matter? He looked at the empty chair one more time. Then he looked at the door. Commander Ilara Voss was in a shipyard when she heard about Heliodor 9. Titan Yards, Orbital Ring 3. She had been there for 4 days. The walking hull inspections on ships that had been in preparation for a long time. Long enough that the yard workers knew her by face, knew not to offer small talk, knew to just answer questions directly and let her keep moving. The yard smelled like fabrication, hot metal and sealant compound, and the particular sharpness of new systems being run through test cycles. Voss had always liked the smell. It was the smell of things being made ready. She was on the 9th hull when her comm chimed. She read the message, put the comm away, kept walking. The 9th hull was a mid-range carrier, not the largest in the yard, not the most complex, but solid and deep-hulled in a way that Voss appreciated. She ran her hand along the plating as she walked. The metal was warm from the fabrication process. She pulled her hand back. Her aide, Lieutenant Chen, was trailing at a respectful distance with a tablet full of inspection notes. Chen had been working for Voss for 8 months. She had learned in those 8 months that Voss did not narrate her thinking, that questions were answered but not invited, and that the absence of a reaction was itself a kind of reaction, and usually the most significant one. Voss stopped at the bow section, looked up at the curve of the hull. Chen waited. "Are they fueled?" Voss said. Chen checked her tablet. "All 12, Commander. Final fuel loads completed yesterday." "Munitions?" "Full inventory confirmed on 11. The 12th is at 94%. A loading arm issue. Should be resolved within..." "When?" 18 hours. "Good." Voss turned and walked back the way she'd come. Chen kept up. "Commander, regarding the incident at Heliodor 9, I read it. Do you want to amend the timeline?" "No." Chen made a note, or pretended to because there was nothing to note. She had learned that too. Sometimes you hold your tablet and pretend to write because it gives the silence somewhere to go. They walked the rest of the inspection in quiet. At the end of the hull walkway, Voss stopped and looked back at the line of ships. 12 carriers in orbital ring 3. She could see 8 of them from where she stood. Massive silhouettes against the yard's work lighting. Each one dark and still and complete. She had been thinking about this fleet for 4 years, not imagining it, planning it. There is a difference. Imagination is what you do when you're not sure something will happen. Planning is what you do when you've decided. Once she had decided 4 years ago, 3 days after the first incursion. She had kept planning through the second incursion, the third, the supply line disruptions, Heliodor 7, 11 protests, 11 acknowledgments. The committee that was formed and the committee that would now extend to 120 days. She had planned through all of it, and now Heliodor 9 was gone, and the beacon was singing, and the committee was extending, and the Velhari hegemony had looked at 11 incursions with no consequence, and decided that 11 was not a number that meant anything in particular. They'd done it again because nothing happened the first time. That was the whole of it, really. Not malice, not strategy. Just the simple logic of a thing that had no cost. Voss had spent 4 years making sure the cost existed. She looked at the 8 visible ships. Then she walked to her shuttle and went back to the command vessel. She had work to do, and the work had been waiting patiently, and it was almost time to stop waiting. In the outer colonies, the news of Heliodor 9 traveled slower than it did in the Directorate chamber. It reached the colony on Riva 3-4 days after the station went dark. The colony administrator there, a woman named Priya Vasant, who had been running the settlement for 11 years and had survived 2 supply disruptions in the last 9 months, received the notification while she was reviewing the water reclamation report. She read it. She read it again. She set it aside and finished the water reclamation report. Because water reclamation didn't stop being important because a station had disappeared. And the 4,000 people in her colony needed water more urgently than they needed her to sit with the news. When she finished the report, she opened the notification again. 214 people. She had never met anyone stationed at Heliodor 9. She had filed supply requests through the station's logistics office, but had only ever dealt with automated systems, never with a name or a face. She thought about that for a moment. The way a station could have 214 people in it and still feel, from a distance, like just a node in a network, a stop on a route, a number in a manifest. She sent a query to the Directorate's Relief Coordination Office asking about alternative supply routes for the colony's next scheduled shipment, given the loss of Heliodor 9 as a transit point. With the automated response came back in minutes. Your query has been received. Relief Coordination Review is currently subject to a 120-day committee process. Alternative routing options will be assessed as part of the standard review. Thank you for your patience. Vasant looked at the response. She read the part about 120 days. She looked out the window of her office at the settlement. Low buildings in a dust-pale landscape. Solar collectors on every roof. The kids were out in the central yard. School had just released, making the noise that kids make when they haven't seen the inside of a building for 6 hours. She pulled up her emergency supply inventory. She counted. She started making her own arrangements because 120 days was not a number she could give to 4,000 people. And the Directorate's formal acknowledgement reached Earth's diplomatic office exactly 10 days after the hearing, as promised. The office was largely unstaffed by that point. A small administrative team had stayed to manage incoming communications and maintain the formal presence. They received the acknowledgement. They logged it. they sent an automated confirmation of receipt. The acknowledgement was filed in the same directory as the previous 11 acknowledgements. Nobody sent a follow-up. Nobody expected one. In the directorate chamber, in the hallways outside it, in the diplomatic lounges where delegates met between sessions. In all those places, the general understanding was that Earth was upset and would continue to be upset for some time and would eventually return to its seat and resume the process that the process was designed for. Boy, this was how things worked. Species got upset, stations went missing, supply lines got disrupted, committees formed and extended and eventually reported. The process moved slowly because it moved carefully, and careful was better than fast. And the whole architecture of interspecies governance was built on that principle. Earth would return to its seat. That was the general understanding. Coordinator Sheshev held a different understanding, alone in his office that evening with page 11 on his screen and the sound of the empty chamber somewhere down the hall. He had received that afternoon a response to his second follow-up message, not an automated one, an actual response from a senior colleague who had, apparently, finally read his flagged memo. The response said, Sheshev, appreciate the due diligence. I've reviewed the Earth submission. The page in question reads to me as political posturing, possibly connected to internal Earth politics around the upcoming assembly elections. We'll keep it in mind, but don't see immediate cause for escalation. Keep flagging if you see more. Sheshev had read that response 3 times. Political posturing. He looked at the sequence numbers on page 11, 1 to 67 in order, each one with coordinates precise to 3 decimal points, each one annotated with a category and a strike number. He looked at the date. He thought about the 4 years between that date and today. 4 years of incursions, protests, acknowledgements. 4 years of the process processing and arriving at nothing. 4 years of Earth watching the directorate's response and, apparently, building a very organized and detailed list. Political posturing. He closed his colleague's message. He opened a new one. Different recipient this time. Someone higher up. Someone who would need convincing and whose convincing would matter. He started writing. He wrote carefully. He laid it out the way you lay out an argument you need to win. Not with alarm, because alarm was easy to dismiss, but with evidence. Date by date, entry by entry. Page 11, and what it meant, and why it was not posturing. He wrote for 2 hours. He read it back. He sent it. Then he looked at the empty chair in the chamber on his office security feed, the one overlooking the main hall, and he thought about Earth's shipping lanes, about the commercial transit routes that move 2,000 vessels a month, about the fact that nobody had checked on those lanes recently. Wait, he pulled up the lane traffic data. He found a report from 6 days ago. Routine monitoring output. He skimmed to the summary. He stopped. He read the summary again. Detected commercial transit, 0. Not reduced, not disrupted, 0. For 6 days, the lanes that moved 2,000 vessels a month had moved nothing. Sheshev sat back in his chair. His tea was on the desk beside him, gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't touched it. He looked at the cold tea. He looked at the lane report. Outside his window, the directorate station's lights were cycling into night mode, a long, slow dimming that happened every 18 hours to mark the passage of artificial time. The lights went down. He sat in the dimness with the lane report open on his screen. 0. He reached for his comm. He started making calls. Idayo Okafor reached the secondary depot at Kalam Station 2 days later. He spent the layover in the common room, not sleeping, not really eating, running through his manifest for the 6th time on a data pad that he'd long since stopped actually reading. It was something to do with his hands. His hands needed something. One of the other soldiers, a young woman named Torres who'd been on her first frontier posting when this trip started, sat across from him and watched him flip through the manifest pages without reading them. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine. You've looked at that same page 4 times. Checking my work." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Heliodor 9, she said. Were you close with anyone there?" Dio set the data pad down. He looked at it. Then he picked it up again. "I knew a guy named Bautista," he said. "Hey, technician. Terrible at cards." Torres said nothing. 214 people, Dio said. Not to her, just out loud, just to say the number in a room where it could be heard. Same as Heliodor 7 was 147. Torres was quiet. 361 people, he said, between two stations. He turned a page on the manifest. And we're rerouting, he said. He said nothing after that. Torres said nothing either. The common room hummed with the ship's systems, air circulation, engine vibration, the faint rattle of something loose in the ventilation that had been rattling since day one of the journey and would apparently rattle forever. Dio reviewed the manifest page one more time. Then he closed the datapad. He put it down. He looked at the ceiling, in which was uninteresting and low, and had a scratch in the paneling that looked faintly like a river if you tilted your head. He thought about Bautista. He thought about the Velhari beacon, cheerfully looping its message at the empty coordinates where a station used to be. Transit lane realignment in progress. Please divert. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep for a long time. 14 days after Heliodor 9 went dark, Earth stopped answering the Directorate's hails. Not with static, not with a polite message explaining the delay. The channel simply opened and stayed open and stayed empty, the way a phone line sounds when the number at the other end doesn't exist anymore. The Directorate's communications team ran standard diagnostics, all clear. The channel was functional. The signal was reaching Earth's registered diplomatic frequency without any interference. Earth was just not answering. They tried the alternate frequency. They tried the emergency diplomatic relay. They tried the commercial broadcast band, which was irregular but technically permitted under Compact Article 18, Section 2. They tried 3 more times over 6 hours. Nothing. The communications team filed a connectivity report and sent it up the chain. The chain was long. By the time it reached someone who would do anything about it, 2 more days had passed. The Interspecies Relations Office drafted a formal inquiry. They sent it through 3 channels simultaneously. The primary diplomatic frequency, the relay, and a direct text protocol transmission that required no voice connection to receive. They requested confirmation of receipt within 48 hours. No confirmation came. Thresh Aniv, informed of the development over his morning briefing, was not particularly concerned. He stirred his tea and told his aide that humans had a documented history of communication withdrawal during diplomatic disputes. He had seen it before. A sulk, he called it. With the particular fondness of someone describing a child's behavior they found charming in spite of themselves. They'll be back, he said. His aide made a note. Coordinator Shesev, informed of the same development through a different chain, sat very still for a long time. He pulled up the shipping lane report he'd flagged 2 weeks ago. Still 0. Not 0 as in a slow day, 0 as in a number that had not moved. 23 days of monitoring. 0 commercial transit across Earth's outer lane network. He pulled up a secondary monitoring report. Beacon traffic from civilian vessels in the middle lane corridor, the one that ran between Earth's colony ring and the main Directorate transit hubs. Normally, that corridor showed 400 to 600 beacon pings per day. The last logged ping was 19 days old. He looked at both reports side by side. No diplomatic communication, no commercial traffic, no civilian beacon pings. Earth had not gone quiet. Earth had gone empty. There is a difference. Quiet means someone is there and not talking. Empty means nobody is in the place you're looking at. He filed an urgent request for a long-range sensor sweep of Earth's orbital space. The request went to the monitoring division. My standard processing time was 5 to 7 business days. He flagged it as high priority. That reduced it to 3 to 5. He sent a message to his contact above his contact, someone with enough authority to push the sweep through immediately. Then he pulled up every recent report he could find on Velhari hegemony assets near the Meridian Line. He read for a long time. The Velhari Border Patrol vessel Ath Sivan was running a standard observation pass along the outer edge of hegemony-controlled space when its long-range sensors registered a contact. The patrol commander, a veteran officer named Velsora, who had run the same route for 7 years without incident, looked at the reading and assumed it was a calibration error. Long-range sensors on a border patrol vessel were not, as a rule, precise instruments, or they were good enough to tell you that something was there, and roughly how large and roughly in which direction it was moving. Beyond that, you verified with closer passes and direct observation. She ordered a closer pass. The contact did not resolve into a clearer shape. It expanded. She ordered the sensors recalibrated. Fresh baseline. Full diagnostic sweep. The sensors came back clean. The contact was still there. It was larger now, or rather the sensors were better understanding how large it had always been. They were reading drive signatures. Multiple drive signatures, layered on top of each other in a way that made them initially appear as one large reading rather than many distinct ones. Her systems were not designed to parse this kind of reading, because this kind of reading was not something that happened on a routine border patrol pass. The tactical officer ran a manual count. He stopped counting at 40 and reported upward. Velsora looked at the readings. She looked at the tactical officer. She looked at the readings again. She picked up her communication line and filed a contact report. She used the word significant in the report because she could not, in the moment, find a more accurate word, and significant was a word that traveled up a chain of command without losing too much meaning on the way. Her superior officer received the report, called her excitable, recommended she verify the calibration and resubmit if the anomaly persisted. Velsora set the comm down. She looked at the readings on her screen, which were not a calibration error, which had not changed since she'd been looking at them, which were in fact slowly becoming more defined as the distance decreased and the sensors had more time to resolve what they were seeing. She looked at her tactical officer. "Run the count again," she said. He ran it again. He came back with a different number, higher. She filed a second report. This one she marked as urgent. This one she addressed over her superior's head to the regional command. Then she kept watching the readings. The contact, the thing the sensors could not fully describe with the vocabulary they had been built for, continued its movement. Steady, even, unhurried. Not the movement of something trying to hide. The movement of something that had already decided where it was going. She watched it for a long time. She thought about the human station that had disappeared, and the other one before it, and the hearings she'd seen reported on the directorate feeds. She thought about the formal statement and the committee that had been formed to review it. She thought about the contact on her screen. She thought about the word significant and whether it was doing enough work. She reached for the comm again. The long-range sensor sweep that Coordinator Sheshev requested came back in 2 days. A record for the monitoring division, because someone above Sheshev had finally read his messages and understood enough to apply the right kind of pressure. Sheshev read the report in his office with the door closed. Earth's orbital space showed no commercial vessels, no civilian traffic, no freight haulers, no colony supply ships, no passenger transports. Watch the standard infrastructure of a civilization that moved 2,000 vessels a month through its shipping lanes was completely absent. What the sensors did show was military configuration, not an absence but a rearrangement. The particular kind of orbital spacing that spoke to a fleet that had been organized and was no longer in the place it was usually kept. The sweep couldn't tell him where the fleet had gone. He pulled the sensor data from the relay stations along the main Earth-to-Directorate corridor. The last relay ping from an Earth vessel was 18 days old. He pulled the data from the outer buffer zone monitors. The buffer zone monitors had been running on automated cycle. Nobody had been actively watching them because the buffer zone was, by definition, a demilitarized space where nothing was supposed to happen. When he ran a retrospective analysis on the last 30 days of data, the analysis took 20 minutes. He looked at the results. 17 days ago, a large-scale movement had passed through the outer buffer zone. The monitors had logged it, filed it automatically, and generated a routine traffic report that had gone into a queue that had not been reviewed. The traffic report had the word significant in it. He looked at the movement data. The scale of it made him sit back in his chair. The Velhari Border Patrol's report, the one from Oth Savan, the one that had been called excitable, was on his screen too. He pulled it up next to the buffer zone data. He compared the two. Same movement, different observation points, the same thing seen from 2 angles. He had been worried for weeks. Or he had been sending messages and filing flags and writing careful arguments and waiting for someone to listen. He had been doing all of that in the deliberate, methodical way the directorate process required, because the directorate process was what he had. He looked at the data. He was not worried anymore. Worry was for situations where there was still time to prevent something. He reached for the comm with a steadier hand than he expected. Sergeant Dio Okafor received his orders on a Tuesday. Of course, it was a Tuesday. In a transit bay on Callum Station that smelled like recycled air and cheap food from the commissary 3 levels up. The orders came in the standard military format, which was a document with a lot of numbers and a small number of words. and the words were chosen to be precise rather than informative. Dio read them twice, which was once more than he usually needed, because the first time through he thought he might be misreading the scale of the operation. He was not misreading it. He folded the orders and put them in his chest pocket and looked out the bay window at the Callum Station docking ring, where two more transport vessels were completing their berthing procedures. Behind them, through the station's outer viewport, he could see the edge of the fleet. Not all of it, not even close to all of it, but enough of it that the stars on one side of the viewport were partially blocked by the silhouettes of ships. Enough ships to block stars. He had been a soldier for 11 years. He had served in 3 conflicts, 2 containment operations, and more frontier postings than he cared to count. He knew what a deployment looked like. He knew what a significant deployment looked like. He had a clear sense of the scale vocabulary. This was outside his vocabulary. The briefing was held 2 hours later in the bay, with 89 other soldiers and 1 briefing officer who delivered information the way a weather system delivers rain. Thorough, impersonal, covering everything without caring about any of it. The briefing officer laid out the objectives, the operational zones, the specific targets and the sequence in which they would be addressed, the rules of engagement, which were detailed and precise and addressed many specific scenarios with clear and specific answers. Dio listened. He was a careful listener. He listened the way you listen when you know the briefing will be done in 20 minutes, and after that you will have only whatever you remembered. Oh, so you try to remember everything. He organized it as he listened. Objectives here, timeline here, contingencies here, ROE here. He noticed about halfway through that none of the rules of engagement included a stopping condition. Conditions for escalation? Yes. Conditions for tactical withdrawal in specific scenarios? Yes. Conditions for pause pending command review? Yes, in very limited circumstances. Stopping condition, as in a defined state at which the operation concludes on its own terms, without further command instruction. Not present. He thought about that. The briefing officer finished and opened the floor for questions. There were several questions about logistics, about communication protocols, about extraction procedures and support availability. Dio's question was simpler. When do we stop? He asked. The room went quiet. The briefing officer looked at him, not with surprise, with the particular neutral expression of someone who was expecting the question and had an answer for it and had chosen the answer carefully. When the objectives are complete, the briefing officer said, all 67 of them. A pause. That's classified. Oh yeah now, Dio said, mostly to himself, in the way that was not really a response to anyone, but just a sound the inside of his head needed to make. He looked down at the briefing document in his hand. He looked at the objectives. He understood. They were not stopping. That was the answer. Not because the answer was hidden. It was right there in the briefing, in the absence of a stopping condition. The directorate would send an envoy, would send 2, would send formal cease and desist orders and legal notices and compact article violations. All of that would happen, and Earth would keep going. Not out of rage, not because anyone had lost their mind, because 4 years ago someone had made a calculation, and the calculation had been double-checked and revised and checked again over 4 years. And the answer at the end of it was a number from 1 to 67 in order. And the only way the calculation was complete was when the list was done. Dio looked at the other soldiers in the bay, 89 of them, most of them younger than him, a few older, all of them looking at their briefing documents with the specific expression of people processing something that is larger than they expected. He thought about Bautista. He thought about 214. He thought about 361, which was Heliodor 7 plus Heliodor 9, and about the 400,000 people in the colonies that had gone 30 days without supply runs, and about the 4-year-old date at the bottom of page 11, and about the empty chair in the directorate chamber. He looked at the objectives list. He folded his briefing document and put it away. Oya, he said, let's get ready then. Commander Voss was in the officers' mess eating dinner when the fleet crossed the Meridian line. She had eaten in the officers' mess every night since the operation began, not in her office, not at her desk, but in the mess, at the same small table in the far corner, alone. The mess was quiet at that hour. Most of the senior officers ate earlier. Well, the few who came in at this time saw Voss at her corner table and understood, without being told, that the table was not an invitation. She ate the same meal she always ate on operations. Not by design, it was just what she ordered, because she had never put much thought into what she ate, and food was not something she needed to be interesting right now. Protein ration, black coffee from the machine on the east wall, which produced coffee that was technically coffee in the same way that recycled air is technically air. A bent spoon she'd been using for 6 years, bent at some point she couldn't remember anymore, that she kept because replacing it had never risen to the level of a priority. The food was not good. She ate it. Outside the viewport beside her table, the stars moved in the long, slow drift of cruise speed. Ordinary stars. The same stars. Slightly rearranged in meaning. Her datapad was on the table next to the tray. It showed the fleet formation in live display. 12 carriers and their accompanying vessels, spread across a width of space that was difficult to intuitively grasp from inside one of the ships. From inside, it felt like a single vessel moving through space. From the outside, which she had seen in the planning maps, it looked like something a different word needed to describe. The Meridian Line crossing had been logged 40 minutes ago. No alarms had been triggered on the human side. That was expected. Earth had removed its own monitoring alerts from the buffer zone 18 days ago because alerting yourself to your own fleet's position was not useful. On the Velhari side, she expected, alarms were now triggering. Border monitors, patrol vessels, command chains receiving increasingly urgent reports from subordinates they were inclined to call excitable. She ate. She thought about timelines. She thought about the sequence, 1 to 67, and the order in which the targets would be reached and what each one's removal would mean for the shape of the situation. She thought about the human cost because she always thought about it, because she had put it into the planning from the beginning, and she was not about to take it out now. Every soldier and pilot and crew member on this operation had been briefed. Every one of them had a function. Every function had redundancies. She had built the redundancies herself over 4 years, adjusting them as circumstances changed and new information came in. She had not built this because she was certain everyone would come home. She had built it because the math required trying. She drank the coffee. It was bad. She looked at the fleet display. She looked out the viewport at the stars. She picked up her bent spoon and finished the rest of the ration. She did not look like a woman starting a war. She looked like a woman eating dinner, alone at a corner table, who happened to have 67 things to do before she slept. In the directorate chamber, the emergency session was called for the following morning. Coordinator Shesov attended. He had not slept. He was in his chair in the third tier, third row, with a data pad full of reports and a cup of tea he'd filled and forgotten about. Gone cold on the arm of the seat. The chamber was louder than usual. Delegates conferring with their aides, voices overlapping. The particular sound of a room full of people who have received alarming information and have not yet decided what to do with it. The monitoring division had finally issued a full report. The report described, in the careful and precise language of Directorate monitoring procedures, the movement of a large formation of vessels from Earth's orbital space through the Meridian buffer zone and across the Meridian line into the region of space adjacent to Velhari hegemony-controlled territory. Large formation. The report used that phrase because the monitoring procedures did not have a vocabulary for what they were actually looking at. Large formation was the best the available language could offer. Threshonev was not in his usual seat. He was at the front of the chamber, standing, which he almost never did. His composure was intact. The folds of his diplomatic dress still arranged correctly, his voice still measured. But something around his edges was different. The quality of his stillness was different. He was still the way things are still, right before they move. He was speaking about Article 24 of the Compact and Earth's clear and serious violations, and the Directorate's obligation to respond, and the specific measures available under the emergency provisions, and the timeline for implementing them. He spoke well. He always spoke well. Shesov looked at the cold tea on his armrest. He looked at the empty chair in the Earth delegation section, still empty, still holding its small Earth seal. And he thought about page 11 and the sequence numbers and the date. He thought about the fact that the fleet had already crossed the line. Well, it had already crossed. The Directorate was meeting now. The emergency session would run, by procedure, for at least 4 hours. Motions would be filed. Legal teams would assess the compact article violations. Formal demands would be drafted and transmitted. The process would process as fast as the process could process, which was faster than usual in an emergency but still not fast. The fleet was already across the line. Sheshev picked up his cold tea. He held it. He did not drink it. He thought about a woman he'd seen once on a diplomatic feed, a recording from the last Earth hearing, which he had watched several times. Ambassador Croft, reading her statement in that flat, even voice, turning pages, not looking up. He thought about the 11 characters she had sent after walking out. He didn't know what the message said, and he'd tried to find out. The message had been encrypted with an Earth military cipher that the Directorate's analysis team had not been able to break, which itself was information. He thought about what you send in 11 characters to a fleet commander when you are done with the room you just left. Whatever it said, it had been enough. The chamber was loud with procedure. Sheshev set his cold tea down. He opened his data pad. He pulled up page 11. He looked at sequence number 1. Then he looked at the live fleet tracking data his contact had forwarded, which was not supposed to be in his possession but was, and which showed the fleet's position and heading. He found sequence target number 1 on his monitoring map. He found where the fleet was. He did the distance calculation. He set the data pad face down on his knee. And he looked at the chamber ceiling, the high engineered dark, the curve of pale stone above all 47 of them. He thought about how the chamber was built to make species feel small. He thought about how it was mostly working right now. He sat quietly in his seat and let the session move around him. There was nothing to do. There just was not enough time left to do it in. The first thing that went was the communication relay at Velhari Outpost V14. Not because it was the largest target, not because it was the most important one. It was sequence number 1 because it was the first link in a chain, a relay node that connected the outer hegemony border stations to their regional command hub. Without it, the border stations could still talk to each other. They could not talk to anyone above them. The relay went dark at 0312 hours, at fleet time. By 0315, 7 border stations were operating in an information blackout and did not yet know it. The fleet did not stop to observe the result. The fleet moved to sequence number 2. Voss was on the bridge for the first 3 hours, not standing dramatically at the viewport, sitting at the command table with her tactical display, a cup of coffee that she refilled once, and 4 officers around her who had trained for this and knew how to work without being managed. She watched the display. The sequence moved the way a well-built machine moves, without drama, without difficulty, because the people who built it had accounted for the difficulties beforehand, and the accounting was in the structure itself. Each target was reached, each target was addressed, the display updated. The sequence moved to the next number. At 0347, the first Velhari response force came out of the border station at V9. A small patrol wing, 8 vessels, moving toward the fleet's reported position. The position they were moving toward was where the fleet had been 40 minutes ago, based on the last information they had before V14 went dark. The patrol wing was intercepted 30 minutes later, not by the fleet's main formation, but by one of the escort wings that had been positioned for exactly this. The engagement was brief. It was also not lethal. Voss had put that into the ROE deliberately, because the ROE had to make room for what comes after. Dead patrol crews become martyrs. Disabled patrol crews become a message. The 8 vessels were disabled and held. The fleet moved to sequence number 3. At 0511, Voss left the bridge. She went back to her office and pulled up the casualty board, a live display that she had set up on day 1 and had not turned off since and would not turn off now, because the point was to see it. The board showed injured and dead from the fleet's own forces, updated in real time by the medical teams. As of 0511, the board showed 23 injured, 4 dead. She looked at each name. Not the way you look at a list, the way you look at something you are going to carry. She had carried names before. She knew how. She made 4 notes in her personal log, 1 for each name. The notes were brief. They would go to the families eventually in whatever form families can receive things like this. And they needed to be written by someone who had read the names on a board and understood that they were not data. She filed the notes. She went back to the tactical display. Sergeant Dio Okafor's unit hit the platform at 0600. The platform was a mid-tier Velhari maintenance hub, large enough to be target number 8 on the sequence list, small enough that a ground unit could take and hold it. Dio's unit had been assigned the ground campaign early, which meant they had been training for specific targets while the fleet handled the strike sequence. It was organized. It was deliberate. It was the kind of planning that takes years and shows. The platform was defended, not heavily. A platform this size had a security contingent, not a garrison. But the security contingent knew what they were doing and made the entry cost something. Dio took a hit on the way through the third pressure door. Not deep. The armor held most of it, and the medic sealed it in 40 seconds. Un and Dio kept moving because stopping in a breached corridor was a way to make the list of problems longer. They took the platform in 11 minutes, not because they were faster or stronger or more fearless than the defenders, because they had the specific knowledge of the platform's layout, corridor by corridor, door by door, and the defenders did not have the specific knowledge of what they were facing. Preparation is not the same as courage, but preparation makes courage more efficient. Dio secured the main control room and posted his people at the critical junctions, and then stood in the center of the platform's operations floor and breathed for a moment. The operations floor was a functional space, industrial, screens showing system statuses, equipment racks on the walls. When the smell of a workspace, metal and heat, and the particular smell of systems that have been running for a long time without stopping. Normal. Ordinary. A place where people had been doing their jobs an hour ago. He reported the platform secure up the chain. Confirmation came back. Good. Hold and await secondary assignment. Secondary assignment took 40 minutes to come through. Dio used the 40 minutes to walk the platform. Not for tactical reasons, but because he was the senior soldier on site, and it was his job to know what he had, and also because walking was something to do with his body while his mind worked. He walked the maintenance corridors, the equipment bays, the personnel quarters, empty now, the occupants in the secured holding area waiting for transport. Small rooms, functional. The kind of small room that anybody lives in when they live in a place that exists to serve a function rather than to be lived in. Bunk, storage, one personal item allowed per bunk, a photo, a small plant, a worn book with a spine that had been cracked and recracked a dozen times. Normal, ordinary. He kept walking. He came out on the platform's observation deck, a narrow external space, more of a maintenance walkway than anything designed for standing and looking, but it had a viewport and he stopped at it. Stars, the same ones, different angle. He thought about Platform 8 and the fact that there were 67 of them. He thought about the distance between number 8 and number 67, which was a lot of maintenance corridors and equipment bays and small rooms with one personal item per bunk. He thought about Bautista. He thought about what Heliodor 9 looked like right now. Not the station. The station was gone. The coordinates. He thought about empty coordinates with a beacon looping his cheerful message, and about the fact that the beacon was sequence number 19, which meant it was still 12 targets away. His comm chimed. Secondary assignment. He went back inside. The Directorate's envoy arrived at the edge of the engagement zone on the third day. A single diplomatic vessel, the Sovereign Accord, which was the Directorate's standard crisis response ship, large enough to be visible and clearly marked with the Directorate's insignia on every surface that could hold it. It broadcast its identity and purpose on every available frequency simultaneously, which was the protocol for a vessel that wanted to be extremely clear about what it was. It was met by 2 human escort vessels. The escorts were polite. They matched the Sovereign Accord's speed. They communicated through a professional and courteous human officer who introduced himself by name and rank and acknowledged the envoy's status and purpose without any hostility. He then explained that the Sovereign Accord was being requested to hold its current position until the operation was complete. The envoy's commander asked what timeline that involved. The human officer said he didn't have that information. The envoy's commander asked to speak to Commander Voss. The human officer said he would pass the request forward. The request was passed forward. Voss at the time was reviewing the casualty board and updating her log. She received the request from the Sovereign Accord and set it aside in the priority queue between 2 other items that needed her attention. Not because the envoy didn't matter, because the envoy's presence was already accounted for in the planning, and the planning's response to it was the two escort vessels and the professional and courteous officer, and that response was already executing correctly. She went back to the casualty board. 41 injured, 11 dead. She wrote 11 notes. The Sovereign Accord held its position. It transmitted formal compact violation notices on 4 separate channels. It transmitted a cease and desist order drafted by the Directorate's senior legal team, citing 17 articles of the Interspecies Compact and requesting immediate suspension of hostilities. And the escort vessels received each transmission. Confirmed receipt. The fleet moved to sequence number 22. Thresh Oniv's communication came through on the 4th day. He had been trying to reach the human fleet since the operation began. He had tried through every diplomatic channel, through the Directorate's emergency network, through a back channel that the Velhari hegemony maintained for exactly these kinds of situations. He had tried through the monitoring relay stations. He had tried through the Sovereign Accord. On the 4th day, one message got through. He did not know why that one made it when the others hadn't. Perhaps a brief gap in the communication management the fleet was running. Perhaps it was allowed through deliberately. He would never know. He wrote the message carefully. And he had been thinking about what to write for 4 days. He had gone through many drafts in his head and discarded all of them because they were the wrong frame. Not stop. Stop was not something he could offer as a proposition because he had nothing behind it. Not peace. Peace was for later, if later existed. He wrote, "What are your terms?" 6 words. Simpler than anything he'd written in decades. He sent it. The reply came back in 11 minutes. 6 words. Read the last page. We are. He sat with that for a long time. Read the last page. Page 11. The list. The sequence. 1 to 67 in order. We are. Not we will. Not we intend to. We are. Present tense. Active. Already in progress. We are reading the last page. We are doing exactly what the last page said we would do. He had spoken for 22 minutes at the hearing. He had said many things about dialogue and proportionality and process and the importance of restraint. 6 words. He set the communication down. He looked at his diplomatic desk, the tidy stacks of documents, the formal seal of the Velhari hegemony, the 2-decade accumulation of a career spent making large things manageable through language. He thought about the fact that he had called the human statement charming. He sat for a while. Then he began drafting a different kind of message, addressed not to the human fleet but to the hegemony's own command, because there were still 23 targets on the list, and the hegemony's command needed to understand something that he was only now formulating clearly enough to write. The understanding was this: the humans were not punishing the hegemony. They were not expressing anger or demanding recognition. They were completing a calculation. The calculation had been started 4 years ago and had been running patiently through 11 incursions and 2 stations and 11 protests in 2 committees and 120 days of review. The calculation was finishing now. If the hegemony wanted the calculation to end before it reached 67, it needed to understand that no amount of diplomatic language would interrupt the math, because the math was not diplomatic. The math was the thing that existed underneath diplomacy, the thing diplomacy was supposed to prevent from having to be used. They had not prevented it. The message he needed to send was, the process is over. What comes after the process is what you're looking at now. Respond accordingly. He wrote it in formal Velhari diplomatic language, which required 47 words to express what he just said in 32. He sent it. He hoped it was not too late for it to mean something. On the 6th day, Dio Okafor's unit was reassigned to a different kind of target. Not a maintenance hub, not a relay station, or a supply depot. This target was a set of coordinates that had no beacon, no automated signal, no cheerful broadcast. Just coordinates and what was at those coordinates, which was what used to be Heliodor 7. Dio received the assignment and looked at the coordinates in the briefing for a long time. He knew those coordinates. He knew them because he had looked them up after Heliodor 7 went dark and then looked at them again after Heliodor 9 went dark. The way you keep checking a wound to see if it's closed. He assembled his unit and ran the standard pre-op brief and answered questions and checked equipment and did all the things that are required before an operation, and he did them efficiently and without visible difficulty. Torres caught him before they loaded into the transit vehicle. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine. Same face as last time you said that." He looked at her. She was young. She had that specific quality of young soldiers who are smart enough to have figured out what they've gotten into and are not sure yet what to do with knowing. "We're going to the Heliodor 7 site," he said. Torres took a moment. "Oh, yeah. Is it?" She stopped. Started again. "What will be there?" "Wreckage, probably. Whatever's left." He picked up his kit bag. "That's why we're going." She didn't ask more. She was learning. Punisher, the transit was 40 minutes. Dio spent it the way he spent most transits, going through the briefing doc, which he had already memorized, because going through the briefing doc was something to do with his hands that also meant he didn't have to make conversation. They secured the wreckage site in 6 minutes. No resistance. The site was not defended because there was nothing left here that needed defending. Just the scattered remnants of a structure that had been large and was no longer, floating in the slow drift of orbital mechanics, going wherever physics was taking it. Dio walked the wreckage. It was not a walk you could take quickly. The gravity was uneven, the footing was wrong, and the debris was distributed in a pattern that required attention. He moved carefully, methodically, the way you move through any difficult space, with his eyes ahead and his body following and his mind keeping the map. His unit moved with him, spreading out in the standard search pattern. They were looking for anything that could be identified, anything that could be documented, anything that could go into a report and eventually find its way to someone who needed to know it was found. Dio came to a section of the wreckage that had been part of the station's main deck. He could tell by the grade of the paneling, which was civilian spec, not structural. He moved through it carefully. He found the countertop in the corner of what had been a small communal space. A break room, maybe, or a common area. The surface had warped in the station's destruction but had stayed in one piece, one anchored to a section of wall that had somehow survived in a recognizable shape. On the countertop was a coffee mug, half melted. The handle was gone. The body of it was still cup-shaped enough to identify as a cup, but wrong, softened, leaning slightly, the glaze cracked in patterns that showed where the heat had been most intense. Still sitting there, on the countertop, like someone had set it down and gone to answer something and would be back in a minute. Dio stopped. He looked at the mug. He did not move for a while. He thought about 147 people, which was a number he had carried for 9 months. He had carried it in the careful, controlled way you carry a number that you have to function alongside. Not too close, not put down, just held at the right distance, so it gives you purpose without taking you apart. He looked at the mug. One person had put that mug on that countertop. One person with 1 cup of coffee in one small moment of an ordinary day, before the day stopped being ordinary. And the mug was still there because the physics of what happened had, in its indifference, allowed a half-melted cup to sit on a warped countertop while a station and its people were simply gone. He stood there for exactly as long as he could afford to. Then he said, 147 people. Out loud, not to anyone, not for any tactical reason. Just so the number was said in the place it belonged. Then, "Oh yeah, let's keep moving." He turned around. His unit was watching him, spread out in the wreckage, each of them in the middle of their search but paused, eyes on him. They moved. Voss updated the casualty board at the end of each day. Not automatically. The board updated itself. She read it at the end of each day because the reading was her job, and she had decided that at the beginning and was not going to undecide it now. Day 7, 61 injured, 23 dead. She wrote 23 notes. Her aide, Lieutenant Chen, had been working 18-hour days since the operation began. Chen was competent and calm and had not complained once, which Voss noticed without commenting on. She would comment on it later in the assessment. For now, she needed the competence and the calm, and Chen apparently needed to provide both, so the arrangement worked. On the evening of Day 7, Chen came into Voss's office with a tactical report from Sector 4. One of the operation's more difficult zones, multiple targets in proximity to each other, requiring more precise sequencing than other areas. And the report showed a projected casualty rate for the next 48 hours. Chen laid out a proposed adjustment, a modified approach to the target sequence in Sector 4 that would change the route geometry, introduce a longer transit between targets, and reduce the projected casualty estimate by 12%. It would add 22 days to the timeline. Voss listened to the full proposal. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the modified route. She approved it. Chen made a note. Then she paused, which was unusual. "Commander," she said, "if I may." Voss looked at her. 22 days is significant. The Directorate escalation timeline? I know the timeline. The envoy has been in holding pattern for 7 days. They will push the legal framework harder if we extend. I know. Chen stopped, but Voss looked at the casualty projection, looked at the 12%, looked at the 22 days. 22 days is not more important than 12%, she said. Chen wrote it down, not because it needed writing down, because she needed something to do with her hands in the moment of understanding that what Voss had just said was not a calculation. It was a principle, and the principle had been in the planning from the beginning, underneath all the math, load-bearing and quiet. We will not buy speed with the people who are doing this. Chen filed the modified route. The sequence adjusted. The fleet moved accordingly. The Directorate's second envoy arrived on day 9. This one brought 2 additional legal vessels and a formal representative of the Velhari hegemony, who had been invited specifically because the Directorate's legal team had determined that having the aggrieved party present at the cease and desist would add weight to the formal demand. They were all met by the same 2 escort vessels, the same professional and courteous human officer, who explained again that the fleet was in the middle of an operation, who said again that he would pass requests forward. The hegemony representative asked to understand the terms under which Earth would halt the operation. The human officer said, "I'll pass that forward, sir." He passed it forward. Voss received the message while she was reviewing the Sector 4 route adjustment with her tactical team. She read it. She thought about it for the length of time it takes to decide something you already decided a long time ago. She sent back 6 words. Wait when the last page is done. By day 14, the fleet had reached sequence number 44. Dio's unit had taken 4 more platforms and a mid-tier station. He had 41 soldiers. He had started with 89. The others were not dead. They were injured, reassigned, rerouted to secondary units. The unit was smaller because the unit's job was smaller now. The big platforms were behind them. The remaining assignments were specific and contained, and you needed fewer people to do a specific and contained job correctly than you needed to do a large one. He sat in the transit bay between assignments with the remaining 41 and held the manifest for the current assignment. He had stopped reading the manifest the way he used to read it, which was cover to cover, all the way through, for completeness. Now he read only the current page, the current assignment, the next thing, the next thing. That was how you got through something that was very large without losing your footing. You made the large thing into the next thing, and you did the next thing, and then the next thing became a different next thing, and you did that one. Tora sat across from him. She was reading her own briefing. She had stopped looking to him for reassurance, which meant she had found her footing on her own. He noted this the way he noted things that mattered and filed it for later. 44 down, she said without looking up. 23 to go. How are you doing? Fine. She looked up this time. Same face again, she said. He met her eyes. He thought about Bautista. He thought about the mug on the countertop. As he thought about 11 dead from his own fleet, which was a number he also carried, alongside 147 and 214. I'm doing the next thing, he said. Torres looked at him for a moment. Yeah, she said. Me too. She went back to her briefing. Dio looked at the manifest. The current assignment was sequence number 45. He read the page. He got ready. Sequence number 67 was a small thing, not in location. It was a significant transit hub, the kind of installation that moved a lot of traffic and coordinated a lot of schedules, and had a large staff and a complex internal structure. It was significant by any practical measure. But it was the last one. And because it was the last one, it had a weight that had nothing to do with its size. Every step of the sequence had been pointing toward it for 36 days. Every target before it had made the next one possible, and the one after that all the way down the chain until there was no more chain. 67 had been sitting at the end of the list since the list was written. Patient, numbered, waiting. The fleet reached it on a Tuesday. Not because anybody planned it that way, just because that was how the days fell. The operation that cleared sequence number 67 was clean and quick and not dramatic. Most operations, when they are well planned, are not dramatic. Drama is what happens when preparation is missing. The preparation for this was not missing. The operation ran, it completed, and the tactical display updated for the last time. 67 of 67, complete. Voss was on the bridge. She watched the update come through. She looked at it for a moment. The number on the screen, in the small final change from 66 to 67, which was a small change that was not small in what it meant. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "Begin withdrawal sequence. Standard order." Her bridge crew acknowledged. The fleet began to move. The withdrawal looked to outside observers like the arrival had looked. Organized, deliberate, unhurried. The same precision in reverse, units pulling back in sequence, escort vessels repositioning, the formation consolidating as the operation's outer edges retracted toward the core. It was not a retreat. A retreat is what happens when you leave because you have to. This was something else. A leaving because the thing you came to do was done, and staying past done would be a choice without a purpose. Which the Sovereign Accord and its two accompanying legal vessels had been in holding pattern for 36 days. The Valieri hegemony representative had been in holding pattern for 27 of those days. The human officer who had been communicating with them had been professionally courteous for every one of those days and had passed forward every request and had never once said anything that was not true. When the withdrawal began, the holding pattern released. The Sovereign Accord's commander reached the human officer immediately. "Is the operation concluded?" she asked. "Yes, Commander." "We are authorized to proceed into the operational zone for assessment?" "Yes, Commander. Standard access. All detainees will be transferred to Directorate custody at Rendezvous Point Echo." A pause. "That's... yes, honey, thank you." "Of course." The professional and courteous human officer signed off and went to find something to eat because he had been on a 16-hour shift and was not at his best. The Sovereign Accord moved into the operational zone. Its assessment team spent 4 days taking stock of what had changed. The report they produced was thorough, precise, and written in the careful language of people who are trying to describe something accurately without yet knowing what it means. It listed what had been targeted and what the current status of each target was. It listed what had not been targeted: civilian infrastructure, population centers, medical facilities, food distribution networks, educational institutions, and confirmed their current status, which was intact. Everything on the list addressed. Everything not on the list untouched. The report used the phrase surgical precision and then crossed it out and used structured selectivity instead, because surgical precision implied speed, and speed was not the defining feature of what had happened. The defining feature was structure. Every decision about what to hit had been made before the first target was reached, and nothing had been added to the list during the operation, and nothing had been removed from the list during the operation. The list was the operation. When the assessment team filed their report, they added a note at the bottom that was not technically required, but that the team lead felt was important. The note said, "The targeting documentation provided by Earth's Unified Council prior to this operation accounted for every confirmed target within this operational zone. No target was engaged that was not on the pre-submitted list. No target on the pre-submitted list was left incomplete. We have no methodological language for the level of pre-operational planning this implies, but the assessment team notes that the operation appears to have been complete as a concept before it began as an action." The note was filed with the report. The report went to the Directorate's Emergency Review Committee. The Emergency Review Committee met immediately. The chamber was loud, not the polite, procedural sound of a normal session. It's loud the way rooms get when many intelligent beings are in the same place with a piece of information that none of them know how to hold. 47 delegations, all present, every seat filled except one. The Earth seal on the empty chair had gathered a thin layer of the dust that comes from 36 days of a room being used heavily. Small thing. Nobody had cleaned it because nobody's job was cleaning individual chair seals during an emergency session. Thresh Aniv was present. He sat in his usual seat, not at the front of the chamber as he'd stood during the early emergency sessions, but at his proper seat in his proper position. He was still. His composure was still intact. His diplomatic dress was still correctly arranged. He did not look like a man who had lost anything. He looked like a man who had learned something, on which is a different thing and sometimes costs more. He listened to the chamber. He had been listening for 3 hours now. The debate was covering everything. The compact violations, the precedent being set, the legal framework for a response, the mechanism for damage assessment, the appropriate measure of Earth's liability under international law. Voices overlapping, positions being staked, the architecture of the directorate's response being built in real time from the floor up. It was good work. The directorate was good at this kind of work. Thresh-Shah-Neev listened. He thought about the 6 words he'd received. Read the last page. We are. He had read the last page. He had read it many times. He understood it now in a way he had not understood it when he called the human statement charming. However, in the way that you understand a thing differently after you have watched it be exactly what it said it was. He thought about the relay he'd lost, the shipyard at V31, the supply hub, the communication nodes that had gone in the first 72 hours and had made every subsequent response more difficult because the first things on the list were the things that connected other things. It had been planned that way, not improvised, not chosen in the moment. Chosen 4 years ago, ordered, numbered, and executed in that order. He thought about the word charming. He would not use that word again. Not about this. Not about anything connected to this. The chamber was debating Earth's compact violations now. Article 14, Article 24, Article 31, Article 7, Section 4. A legal team was presenting the framework for a formal finding. And the finding would be significant. It would go into the permanent directorate record. Earth would face formal censure, possibly sanctions, possibly restrictions on diplomatic access. All of that was appropriate and would happen through proper procedure. Thresh-Shah-Neev sat quietly through it. He was thinking about something the Preth delegate had said in the first emergency session 3 weeks ago. Sheshev had spoken briefly, once, in the middle of a 6-hour session, and said something that had been sitting in Thresh-Shah-Neev's mind since then, like a stone in a shoe. He looked across the chamber at Sheshev, who was sitting in his third-tier seat with a data pad on his knee, listening, not speaking. Thresh-Shah-Neev thought about the things Sheshev had said. Perhaps the more useful question is why Earth calculated, 4 years in advance, Shira that we would not stop them from having to. 6 hours of debate, that one sentence. Then silence. The chamber had moved on from the sentence. There was too much procedural ground to cover to stay with it, but the sentence had not moved on. It sat in the room like a separate presence, waiting for someone to address it directly. Thresh-Shah-Neev had been in the directorate for 23 years. He had seen disputes and crises and conflicts resolved and escalated and managed and occasionally mismanaged. He knew the shape of things. He knew the shape of this. The debate would conclude with formal findings and censure and sanctions, and all of that would happen, and it should happen. And then the directorate would move toward the next phase, which was a new framework for the Meridian Buffer Zone and new protocols and a new set of procedures designed to prevent this from happening again. All of that was appropriate, but the sentence was still there. Why Earth calculated 4 years in advance that we would not stop them from having to. He was not sure the directorate knew how to answer that question. He was not sure the directorate had asked it yet. He sat quietly and let the session move around him. Coordinator Sheshev spoke once during the second day of the post-operation session. He waited until the morning procedural blocks were done, when the chamber was in a brief recess period between formal items. Not a proper speaking time. Just the 10 minutes when delegates could make informal comments or raise points for the record before the next item was called. He stepped to the informal comment podium. The chamber quieted. Not completely. There was still murmur and movement, delegates talking to aides, the administrative staff preparing for the next item. He spoke for 3 minutes. He talked about page 11. Not for the first time. He had been referencing it in memos and messages for weeks, but he had not spoken about it on the floor. He talked about it now calmly, without alarm, because the time for alarm had passed, and what was needed now was something more like clarity. He said, the date on page 11 is the important thing. He said, the date tells us that Earth's response was not a reaction to the second station, or the third incursion, or the 11th. It was a response to the first one, the very first one. In the one the directorate filed as a navigational irregularity and closed within a week. He said Earth looked at that closure and made a decision, and the decision was not to file a protest. The decision was to begin building a list. He said, "We are debating Earth's violations of the compact, which is appropriate. Earth violated the compact. That is true." He said, "But a finding and a censure and a sanction will not address the thing the date on page 11 tells us. The thing the date tells us is that Earth spent 4 years doing math while we were filing things, and now the math is done." He looked at the chamber. He said, "The question I am not sure we have asked yet is what we are going to do differently, not what we are going to do to Earth. What we are going to do differently." He stepped back from the podium. There was quiet for a moment. Then the session moved to the next formal item. Shesov returned to his seat. He picked up his data pad. He looked at page 11 one more time, though he knew it by heart and didn't need to. He looked at it anyway because it was the thing that had started all of his thinking, and he wanted to keep thinking about it, and looking at it helped. 67 targets, in order. The date. He closed the page. He opened a blank document. He started writing what he thought should change, and how, and why, and what the directorate needed to understand about what had happened that was not covered by the compact violation framework. He wrote for a long time. The fleet was 3 days out from Earth when Voss submitted her after-action report. She wrote it in her office alone, over the course of 2 days, which was fast for a report of this size and scope, but was fast because she had been building it in her head since the beginning, the way she built everything, in advance, in pieces, in the quiet hours between other work. The report was 43 pages. The first 42 pages were what after-action reports are: operational summaries, tactical assessments, resource expenditures, casualty analysis, timeline breakdowns, after-action recommendations for future planning. Good work. Thorough. The kind of report that gets read by planners and analysts and filed in the places where fleet operations are reviewed and learned from. Page 43 was one paragraph. She had thought about this paragraph the longest. She had written it many times in her head before she wrote it on the page. She had thought about what needed to be said, and in how many words and what those words were. The paragraph described the new buffer zone coordinates. Not a proposal, not a suggestion. Coordinates. Specific, numerical, precise to 3 decimal points, the same way page 11 had been. The new buffer zone was larger than the old one. It had been drawn not by diplomats sitting around a table working from compact articles and historical precedent. It had been drawn by the geometry of the operation, where Earth's fleet had gone, and what it had done there, and what the shape of that action implied about the line that now existed in practical rather than theoretical terms. The diplomats would argue about it, would work on formalizing it through the compact framework, would negotiate the language. All of that would happen and should happen. But the coordinates were already real. When the fleet had made them real, below the coordinates, she wrote one sentence. "Earth has no further communication at this time." She read it back. She filed the report. She looked out the viewport. The stars at this distance from Earth had a particular quality she recognized. Not visible to the naked eye, not something you could point to and explain, but a quality she knew from long years of looking at them. She was almost home. She thought about 23 people. She thought about the notes she had written. 23 of them, one for each name on the board. The notes were short. They said what she could say, which was not enough and was also the most she had. She would make sure they reached the right people. She thought about 67 targets in order, done. She thought about 147 people and 214 people, and the mug on the countertop at Heliodor 7 that Dio Okafor's unit had documented in their ground report. A half-melted cup still sitting, which was now in the official record because Okafor had made sure it was. She thought about the date at the bottom of page 11. She had written that date herself 4 years ago, the same day she opened the logistics file. 3 days after the first incursion, 3 days after the directorate filed it as a navigational irregularity and closed it. She had looked at that closure and understood something. The understanding was, they will not stop on their own. The process will process, and the committees will meet, and the acknowledgments will be filed, and the thing will keep happening, because there is no cost attached to it happening. And she had thought, there will be a cost. She had not done anything rash with that thought. She had not reported to anyone with it, had not requested authorization for it, had not filed it in the system. She had just opened a document and started writing carefully over 4 years, because the only way to make the cost real was to build it one carefully checked entry at a time. Now it was built. Now it was done. She turned away from the viewport. She had personnel assessments in her queue, the post-operation round, which was always heavier than the regular quarterly. She pulled up the first file. She read it. She signed it. She moved to the next one. Thresh Aniv read page 11 for the last time alone in his private office on the night after the second day of post-operation sessions. He had read it before. Many times. But he had read it before, like a man looking at a threat or a document or a piece of evidence. He read it now like a man looking at something he was trying to understand. 67 targets, in order, coordinates, categories, annotations, sequence numbers that had, over 36 days, become 36 days of his life that he would not have back. The date at the bottom. He looked at the date. He ran the calculation he had run before, many times, and arrived at the same answer he always arrived at. 3 days after the first incursion, which the directorate had filed and closed and called a navigational irregularity. He thought about being in the chamber on that day 4 years ago. He had been in the chamber 4 years ago. It was an ordinary session. He had spoken about something. He couldn't remember what. Trade protocols, possibly. Was something procedural. The hearing had been filed. The incursion had been logged. The system had processed it. And somewhere, 3 days later, a person he had never met had opened a document and typed V14, communication relay, S-class, coordinates, dash, and written it down. And kept it. And added 66 more entries over 4 years, one by one, while the directorate processed and acknowledged and filed. He looked at the date for a long time. He thought about the word charming and what it said about what he had believed humans were. Curious, persistent, small scale, moving through the galaxy like an interesting project still in progress. He had not thought of them as species that planned in decades. He had not thought of them as species that started a response before the second offense, before the third, before Heliodor 7, or before any of the things that had, in the directorate's view, constituted the actual crisis. They had started the response when the directorate filed the first one. That was the lesson. Not the fleet, not the 67 targets, not the precision or the scale or the deliberate, unhurried withdrawal. The date, 3 days after the first incursion. The lesson was that Earth had looked at how the directorate handled the first thing and had understood, from that single data point, what would happen with the second thing and the third and all the rest. And they had been right. The directorate had handled them exactly the way Earth had predicted from the very beginning, with process, with acknowledgement, with committee and review and timeline. And Earth had planned around all of it, quietly, patiently for 4 years. And the plan had worked exactly the way it was built to work. He closed the document. He sat in his office with the lights at their low evening setting. He thought about the new buffer zone coordinates in Voss's report. The directorate's legal team was already working on a formal framework for negotiating those coordinates, for building a new compact article around them, for bringing Earth back to the table with a properly structured process. He would be part of that process. He would do the work, but he would do it differently. He would do it knowing that the date mattered, that the first thing mattered, that when a species, any species, brings a complaint and the complaint is filed and the file is closed, the closing is not the end. The closing is a data point, and data points can be interpreted. He would do it knowing that Earth had spent 4 years interpreting one. He sat for a while longer. He thought about the empty chair and the small Earth seal on its back. Tomorrow there would be a formal communication from the directorate to Earth's diplomatic office, inviting Earth to return to the table. The communication had been drafted carefully, with language that acknowledged the gravity of the situation and the shared interest in establishing new frameworks for dialogue and the directorate's commitment to taking Earth's concerns seriously in the review process going forward. Good language. Appropriate language. He had helped write it. He looked at his desk, at the formal seal of the Valhari hegemony, at the stacks of documents that represented his work and his career in the long, slow, a careful machinery of interspecies diplomacy that he had served for 23 years and believed in and would continue to believe in. He believed in it. He also now understood something about it that he had not understood before. The machinery required everyone to keep bringing things to the table. It required everyone to keep believing the table mattered. And the table did matter. When it worked, it mattered enormously, in ways that were invisible, because the thing it prevented was never seen. But when the table did not work, when the process processed and nothing changed and the thing kept happening, then the people who had been bringing things to the table had a calculation to make. Earth had made its calculation. The directorate would now have to make one too. He turned off his desk light. He sat in the dark for a moment. He was tired in the specific way of someone who has been on high alert for 36 days and has finally been given permission to stop. He got up. He went to his window. The station was in its night cycle. The lights low, the corridors outside quiet. Below the station, or in the direction that felt like below, the stars were still there. The same ones in the same places as they had always been. He looked at them. He thought about the new coordinates in the after-action report. The new line, drawn not on a map, but in the physical reality of what had happened. The new distance between what was and what Earth had made. He would work on formalizing it. He would build the right language for it. He would do the work that needed doing, and he would do it better than he had done it before. Because the date at the bottom of page 11 had shown him something he could not now unknow. The first thing was the one that mattered. Dio Okafor was back on Earth on a Friday. He knew it was a Friday because he had torn off the right number of sheets and the calendar said so. Lagos in spring, which was the picture for this month, not the dawn photo, but a different one, a market in the afternoon, color and motion in ordinary life doing what ordinary life does. He did not go to Lagos. He had no reason to go there. His posting was in the orbital facility outside Nairobi, and that was where the transport dropped him and where his bunk and his next assignment were waiting. He unpacked his kit in the bunk room. Why he had fewer things to unpack than when he left, because some of his things had been redistributed at various points during the operation when redistributing made sense. He had more things in his pockets than were technically regulation, small items picked up at various points that were not tactical in nature, but were also not nothing. He unpacked those too. He pinned a new sheet of paper on his calendar wall. He wrote the date on it in his own handwriting, which was how he started every new posting. He sat on his bunk. He had a 36-hour stand down before his next assignment. He was supposed to use it for sleep and food, and something the posting briefing called personnel recovery activities, which was the official phrase for doing whatever you needed to do to be functional again. He sat on his bunk and thought about what he needed to do. He needed sleep. He needed food. He needed probably to contact some people he hadn't contacted in 36 days. He did not need to review any manifests. There were no manifests currently in his possession. His hands had nothing to organize. This was strange and took some adjustment. He looked at the calendar. Lagos in spring, the market, color and motion. He thought about Bautista. He thought about the coffee mug on the warped countertop, which was in the official record now because he had made sure it was. He had written the description himself in the ground team's final report. One ceramic drinking vessel, partially melted, intact, location. Main deck communal area, Heliodor 7 wreckage site. Item documented, 6 lines. Precise coordinates, accurate description, 6 lines. It was not enough. It was also all you could put in a report, which was a thing you had to make peace with. He thought about 147 people, and 214 people, and 361 together, and 23 soldiers from his own fleet, and whether those numbers sat differently now that the list was done than they had when the list was in progress. He thought about whether done meant anything in particular for the things that were gone. He decided that done did not change what was gone. What done changed was what was next. He looked at the calendar. He picked up his comm. He messaged Torres. A short one, just, back safe. Good work out there. He sent it. He thought about who else to message and decided that could wait until after sleep. He lay back on the bunk. The ceiling of the bunk room was plain and low and unremarkable. There were no scratches that looked like rivers. No points of interest. Just a ceiling doing its job. He looked at it. He thought about Tuesday and how it was always Tuesday when something happened. He thought about the fleet and the 67 targets and the withdrawal that had looked apparently from the outside like the arrival. Organized and deliberate and unhurried. He thought about what Heliodor 7 had sent the directorate, in the end, which was nothing, which was only coordinates and debris and a half-melted mug and 147 people who should still be there. He thought about whether it was enough, the 67 targets, the new coordinates, the precedent that had been set in the shape of what happened, which would sit in the directorate's memory, not as a document, but as a weight. He didn't know. He knew that the math was done. He knew that the math had cost what it cost, and that the cost was real, and that you didn't get to put the cost somewhere else or reduce it by adding up the justifications. You just carried it. You carried it the way you carry things that need carrying. At the right distance, present enough to keep you honest, far enough back that you could still walk. He closed his eyes. The bunk room was quiet. He slept. On the directorate station, late in the night cycle, Coordinator Shesov sat at his desk and finished his report. It was long, the longest thing he had written in 20 years. It covered everything. The first incursion, the filing, the 4 years, the date on page 11, the sequence, the withdrawal, the new coordinates. It covered what the directorate had done and what it should have done and what it needed to do differently and why. He read it back from the beginning. It was good. He thought it was the best thing he'd written. He thought it said what needed to be said in the way it needed to be said, clearly and without alarm, with evidence and argument, and the kind of patient reasoning that was, he believed, the directorate's best instrument. He filed it. He sent it to the committee that was reviewing the new compact framework. He sent it to the legal team. He sent it to his section head. He sent it to 3 colleagues he trusted. He sat back. The station was quiet. Night cycle. The corridors empty. He looked at his tea, cold from hours ago, untouched. He looked at his desk. He looked at his screen, which showed the filed document and the sent messages and the small confirmation icons that said they had been received. He looked at the directorate seal on the wall above his desk, the formal emblem, 23 years of his career under that seal. He thought about what Voss's report had said at the end. One sentence. Earth has no further communication at this time. He thought about what that sentence meant, not as a diplomatic statement, as a statement of fact. Earth had communicated what it needed to communicate, and the communication was complete. And what came after communication was what you built from it. What the directorate built from this was up to the directorate. He hoped they would build something honest. He reached forward and picked up the cold tea. He drank it. Cold tea was still tea. He turned off his desk light. And he went home. Outside the station, the stars held their positions. The same ones in the same places, in the same indifferent dark that had held everything else since before any of this was a story. The new buffer zone coordinates existed in that dark now, real and precise and unchosen by committee. The wreckage of 2 stations drifted at their coordinates. The directorate's files held their records. The ledger held its date. 3 days after the first one, before the second, before the third, before all of it. When a warning is given and not heard, the warning is not the beginning of the answer. The warning is the last step before the answer that was already being built. The stars held their positions. The dark held everything. And somewhere in the silence between what had happened and what came next, Earth had nothing further to say. It had already said it in 67 entries, in order. Done.